All right, guys, welcome back. I don't know if it was my breath, but I lost all of my students. So you guys can't see them, but you won't hear anybody talking. A couple of them had to go to work. A couple of them, I guess, didn't like me. So we're in this just ourselves. We are going to get through chapter 12. Not a long chapter. Not as much actionable information in this chapter, so you'll see me roll through some of these slides pretty quick. Let me make sure I cover that we're off next week, meaning not meet as a class. The exam will become live. It's already built and out there. It's just kind of been blocked to be turned live. I think it goes live Monday morning. And then the chapters, the Learn Smarts and the quizzes for next week, I'll get those out. I had more than one student say they like them out there ahead of time, so I'll actually try to sit down and get them out maybe through the rest of the year so that you guys would have those out there and able to be done. And then in 2 weeks, let's be prepared to, you should be working with your team. These presentations are going to come up on you pretty quick. So really throughout now, you should be working with your teammates to get your presentations going so that we can be ready to start presenting those, because we only have, I think, 5 or 6 weeks left here. So, okay, and that the guidelines of those are out on Blackboard, and obviously these links will be out there as well. The first one's already out there, and I'll post this one as soon as I'm done. So, all right, the start of this chapter is covering unions. I hope that you guys can see the slides. Again, if you can't, you should be able to get access to them through Connect. I just can't tell how much of a glare from the angle I'm looking at, so maybe I'll ask you guys when you're in class next time. Okay, so in any case, unions. And obviously unions are changing a lot as the workforce is changing. And as a preface, I should give you some of my background with unions. My dad was a General Motors employee for a long time, and he was on the management side and had a lot of direct experience working with the unions. That direct experience was oftentimes frustrating for him, and he brought that frustration home and would talk about it. So I start from a position of not having the best perception of unions. That being said, I'm also aware of the history of our country, and the reason that unions needed to be created was some of the work conditions that these businesses, who were basically just money hungry, were forcing their employees to be a part of, whether it be low wages, bad work conditions. And so a lot of that is what this slide's talking about, job safety regulations, age restrictions. So unions served a really strong purpose in the formation, especially back when we were an industrial country, where putting some boundaries on management so that management wouldn't abuse and neglect employees. I think as businesses have begun to realize that their employees are their talent resource and the ability to retain and recruit the best employees, I think a lot of times now businesses are realizing why they should be on the cutting edge of those things and not just doing the bare minimum. And so I think unions over time now have begun to lose some of their value that they were formative in decades ago. So we still have unions. Teachers unions pretty common. So have auto workers. This is just talking about that we have a lot of public sectors that are unionized, and that's a whole nother layer of tension, where now taxpayers are paying these employees who are then having to pay union dues, and there's this layer of cost in there that may not be valuable, because we should be expecting our government to make sure that all these employees are treated safely and paid fairly and all that. So not only are we paying the government with our taxes, the government's then hiring employees, and then those employees are unionizing. So just some controversy on whether or not that is valuable, or if there's a layer in there that isn't necessary. again, what are the goals? I think the biggest one now is, and we'll get into a collective bargaining slide here in a second, but there still is value in numbers, right? So we might go get people's attention if all the teachers in the country are on the same page about this topic. So there definitely is still value in that, and that's what a lot of what unions are still doing today, is saying, hey, look, we don't just represent this small teacher group here in Lafayette, but rather we speak on behalf of all the teachers, and that can obviously create some negotiating power. Just some of the history on unions here. Again, we talked about a little bit why they came about, work conditions, people being mistreated. So just going through some of the creation of these. Here's a quick slide. For the first time, 7.2 million. So basically half of the union members are working in the government. And so it's showing you several things. One, it's a little bit of a decline in the number of traditional unions, auto workers, whatever, and yet the number of unions in the government sector are holding fairly steady. Collective bargaining, we touched on this a little bit, and again, the way I see it a lot too, where I notice it the most, because I'm a sports guy, is all the player associations. So the NFL Players Association, the NBA has them, and so those are collectively bargained contracts. How many games can we play? How many days off should we get? How many hours of practice should we have? Each team is not negotiating those. All of the NFL players are coming together and negotiating those with the owners of NFL teams. Just some technicalities here on how you actually form a union. Obviously, certification is the actual National Labor Board says yes, you can be a union, and decertification, hey, yeah, we want to no longer be a union. So why does unions exist? We touched on this a little bit, but sometimes it's a union's reputation. There can be some job security, but I can tell you that. I'll tell you a story. My father worked, we lived directly next to a guy who owned a concrete business. So he had Teamsters or truck driver union workers driving his concrete trucks. So we were on like a quarry and lived on it. It was basically kind of closing down. They were going to convert it into some lakefront real estate sort of conversion. The owner of that concrete company lived right next to my dad. Of course, as I already mentioned, my dad was a little bit anti-union, so I'm sure it just came up in natural conversation that his union, his Teamsters, were going to strike because I think they wanted like 50 cents more an hour. They're making, this was a long time ago, but they were making like $20 and they wanted $20.50. And like I said, this is 20 years ago. And the owner was like, I can't pay him more. I'm paying as much as I can pay him. I'm already at a competitive disadvantage. Some of my competitors aren't unionized, and it's killing me. I'm going to lose business. And what he didn't tell my dad until later was that he had already started at the new quarry where he had set up his next shop. He actually put that all under a different company. So long story short, these Teamster guys went on strike, refused to work, and because they wanted this extra 50 cents an hour, and the owner closed that business and just hired new drivers for his other quarry operation. So that left these guys unemployed, and a lot of these guys were really old and couldn't read or write English. And now here they sit trying to get another job because their union said they should be able to get 50 cents more an hour, and they believed that and didn't get it, and now have to try to find another job, and yet they can't fill out an application. So that was a story that was in my life, and again, I understand why they did exist originally, but I think that they got a little bit creating a little bit of competitive lack of competitiveness with some non-union shops. Okay, so this are different types of shops. This slide says it better. A closed shop. You can only hire a current union member for a job. A union shop, it can hire anyone but as a condition of employment, they have to join the union. An agency shop can hire anyone, and then people don't have to join the union, but they have to pay a union fee. And then an open shop, they can do whatever they want. And obviously, not very many open shops. It's kind of one of those things where you either have a union, and if you have a union, everybody's union, or you don't have a union. So some right to work laws. This is talking about the abilities for businesses to say you're not allowed to form a union, and there's some other slides coming up about that as well. So grievances, again, this process of airing a dispute. So if I'm a union shop and I've got a frustration, I can go air a grievance. So I go to a shop steward and tell him what happened. He represents me in negotiations with management. And again, you can see how when management was this kind of bullyish figure, domineering, disrespectful entity, how a shop steward could be somebody that's very needed. You start to look at blurring those lines between management or white collar and blue collar management floor, and start introducing ideas of we want to empower our people and we want to treat people well. It's not quite as necessary for them there to be this shop steward outside of just go to your direct supervisor, and if they don't handle it, you go to HR, or if they don't handle it, you go to your direct supervisor's boss. So there seems to be other methodologies now. But just a lot of terminology that comes in, in these collective bargaining agreements. Again, I go back to the NFL, think of all the things that they have to try to legislate. Owners want this, and players want this, that's that bargaining zone. And then, we're mediating, sometimes arbitrating. The difference between mediation, if I'm a mediator, I'm in the middle, helping both sides understand where each other's at, but I don't have any ruling power. An arbitrator is somebody that does the exact same thing, but I get to decide. It's almost like a judge, but outside of the actual legal system. So an arbitrator often has binding capabilities. You present your side, and I'm going to decide. Okay. Just showing this process graphically. So when we have a conflict, I mentioned the strike. Okay. Not only does sometimes say that Teamsters example I gave you, maybe those local guys go on strike, but maybe every concrete company in the city that has union drivers, all of them go on strike as well in support. Boycotts, pickets are just standing out in front of a business, making people aware. Boycotts come both in a primary boycott, where the members don't buy any services from the organization, but a secondary boycott is where they now try to get other unions to support them by also not buying products. Other things on the management side, you'll get a strike breaker, somebody crosses the strike line. And again, the NFL, we had a lockout where the players were locked out. They weren't allowed to participate because they walked away from the negotiation table, and the owners hired a bunch of scab players, which are people that came across the picket line, came across the strike, and got to work. So those guys actually stuck around the league too, which is pretty interesting. Covered all these. Injunction, a court order in directing someone to do something or refrains from doing something. Especially if, I think this happened with the union port workers, where they were going to go on strike, and therefore nothing was going to be able to come inside the port. And the government went, wait a second, that doesn't just hurt that port, it hurts everybody in the country. We need our supplies to come in, etc. So we're going to get an injunction that says at least 25% of you have to work or something. Challenges facing union workers, I kind of touched on this, the idea that when you even look at General Motors, Ford, Chrysler, I'm not saying that the only reason they struggled financially through the recession was because of unions, but it sure didn't help. If my competition of Toyota, Subaru, Honda, if they're already running a more lean operation, which they were, and again, that has nothing to do with the union, But if on top of that, their employees are not having to pay union dues, so they're able to keep more of their own money, and I don't have to concede quite as many things to the union contract, my labor costs are less. And so that's a real component of what the auto workers had to go through. And they use the example, this last slide of the airline pilots, so there's some unions by state. This is all out there on your slide. Again, part of the still some of the value of collective bargaining or unions is that we also have a trend going on where we're overcompensating, ridiculously compensating our executives. So sometimes in a collective bargaining environment, you can have a lot of maybe frontline workers kind of like raising their hand and saying, hey, wait, if he's able to make that, why can't we make this? So this ability to kind of keep equity in our pay is important. Just some silly stats on people making money. Pay equity is really important. I think, again, I teach in that the TLI 112 class. It's on organizational behavior, and there's a concept called equity theory, and I think it is a real theory where people can become demotivated if they believe that the pay is not equally distributed across the business based on the value that each person brings to the business. So equity pay theory is saying it's okay that everybody has a different pay scale as long as it seems to me to be fair. Meaning, as long as I look at and I say, well, maybe that person has more seniority or that person has a better skill set, I can justify in my head why they make more money than me, then things seem to be in balance or fair. And that's what the equity theory is talking about.